What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your UFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a preview of week number 3 of the 2025 spring football season. Welcome back. We're going to be looking at some of the top plays for your week 3 UFL lineups on DraftKings this week. And where else is there to start other than with Jacob Sailors and the St. Louis Battlehawks? This has been the most productive offense in the league this season. Week 2 was kind of disappointing across the board for offense, but St. Louis continues to put up numbers and through Jacob Sailors directly. And I guess that's where the risk lies somewhat with Jacob Sailors this week. When you look at his exorbitant $10,500 price tag, the highest price on this week's slate, we really need the touchdown production to continue for Sailors to sustain being worth this price. I think twice now he has outperformed his expectation, his projection. I think at about a 35% share of team rushes, which is right where he is here with Manny Wilkins seeing a healthy amount of designed runs as well in this offense. I do think we are due for some regression for Jacob Sailors. I don't know when it's going to happen though, because we do still have the best weighted opportunity role in the league. And we have St. Louis favored by 7 points this week. So even though I am not expecting another 3-touchdown game here in week number 3, I still think we want to probably prioritize Jacob Sailors with St. Louis favored by a touchdown at home against the DC Defenders, who have lost their defensive coordinator, Greg Williams. He has departed the team to join Reggie Barlow's staff at Tennessee State this week. So kind of a tough week for DC to be going through more coaching turmoil, facing right now the prohibitive favorite to win the UFL championship here in 2025. Usual agenda of the show, talk about running backs in favorable game script situations. Jacob Sailors has the most favorable one. St. Louis is the biggest favorite this week. Behind them, the Michigan Panthers are favored by 5.5 points this week. And we do know that Nate McCrary is the guy to deploy here. Okay. The biggest thing that I was wondering about before the season started was how they would have divided up his work with Matthew Colburn. McCrary has just shy of 50% of team rushes on the season, averaging 14 carries a game to just 9 for Matthew Colburn. McCrary playing more snaps, getting more touches, definitely due for some regression in the touchdown department. One thing to keep an eye on with this backfield is that both of these guys, Colburn and McCrary, got a little banged up at the end of last week's game against the Stallions. So I don't know if that means one or both of these guys is going to be limited in any way. I don't know if that means we got to keep an eye on the availability of Jaden Sheridan, who might actually be elevated if there's any injury issues. This game is on Sunday afternoon, and we have not yet seen full injury reports for the Panthers here against the Brahmas. So we're just going to have to monitor what comes out of final injury reports through Friday for this Sunday afternoon game. But right now, we know the Panthers are favored by 5.5 points at home against the Brahmas, and it's probably a good spot, whoever the starting running back is going to be this upcoming Sunday, and the favorite for that is Nate McCrary. Memphis Showboats are favored by 4.5 points at home against the Houston Roughnecks. This is a real battle of the Titans here. I know this is exactly what UFL fans are looking forward to here this week. Jacob Kibodi was listed as the backup last week. It was actually his first game active on the season. He was inactive in week 1, but he did see 50% of the team rushes, and he had 3 targets in the passing game from quarterback E.J. Perry against the DC Defenders last week in what was a relatively neutral game script game throughout. I think that's good news for deploying Kibodi in some tournament lineups here at a really low $4,200 salary. Deneric Prince has been listed as the starter, but last week with Kibodi active, we saw Prince's really, really awesome weighted opportunity role in week 1 with 10 carries and 4 targets dip a little bit. Just 9 rush attempts, no opportunities in the passing game for Deneric Prince in week number 2. Seems to me like Jacob Kibodi might be the more dynamic player in this offense. Saw more opportunities against DC last week, so I like that for tournaments here. But to be clear, it doesn't seem likely Kibodi is going to be listed as the number 1 running back, since Deneric Prince has been listed as the number 1 guy for the first couple of weeks of the season. The touches did not align with that last week, so there is room to believe that they won't align with that again here in week number 3. And then, of course, we have to see if Jalen Jackson is reactivated for Saturday afternoon's game. He was inactive in week 2. Finally, the reigning 3-time champion Birmingham Stallions. Ignore this out tag, folks. CJ Marable is back here for week number 3 which means I think we go back to forecasting roughly an even split of the rush attempts and the targets in this offense between Marable and Ricky Person Jr. Marable was once again listed as the top line starter here on the depth chart for Friday night's game against the Arlington Renegades. So I think that is the way that we want to treat it. But in week number 1, we want to look at how Skip Holtz called the offense that week. 6 rush attempts, 2 targets for CJ Marable. In that game, 6 rush attempts, 1 target for Ricky Person. So pretty much dead on, an even split. Person with a pretty solid game last week. We'll see if he's earned more reps here in week number 3. But Marable not dealing with an injury. I believe he actually welcomed a child to his family last week. So that's why he was away from the team. So congratulations to the Marables. And we'll see how the Stallions divide up the work here in week number 3. Most attractive underdog running back situations. I guess we'll go over to the Arlington Renegades. We saw Day Hunter's tremendous amount of opportunities continue in week number 2 against the Houston Roughnecks. Was a lot more efficient on the ground, but no scoring plays really to show for it. But a better night in the box score, 10.5 fantasy points at $5,500. Same situation here in week 3 as it was in week 2. Day Hunter probably the favorite to lead this team in carries. Kalen Ballage, a little bit more efficient in week 1, came back to earth in week 2 and saw less carries than Day Hunter for the second consecutive week. And then last week, after 3 touchdowns in week 1, didn't see Devian Smith get a touch at all for the Renegades. So it seems like he's quite literally just a goal line back, fullback, right now anyway, for the Renegades, the way that they're using their personnel in this early part of the UFL season. Going backwards, we got the Houston Roughnecks. Kirk Merritt got pretty banged up at the end of last week's game against the Renegades, and he was listed as a non-participant in practice to begin the week for the Roughnecks. If he is out this week, then we have to wait and see who is going to be listed as the starter between Zaquandre White and Lorenzo Lingard. Lingard was the number 1 running back on the depth chart in week number 1. White out-touched him last week. He was not active in week number 1. So that leads me to believe that maybe the Roughnecks weren't impressed with Lingard in week number 1, limited his opportunities in week number 2. And if we do get that news that Kirk Merritt is out for week number 3, then let's keep an eye on how they list these guys. I'm not interested in necessarily playing either one of these guys, but I do think whichever one is listed ahead of the other is probably the better play here in week 3. We've got the Brahmas. Turmoil on the coaching staff. Offensive coordinator A.J. Smith has been dismissed from the Brahmas. He's left the team. They've promoted their wide receivers coach to the new OC here to finish out the season. Waiting on an injury report here. John Lovett was out in week number 2. Jashawn Corbin actually led the Brahmas in opportunities in week 2 ahead of Anthony McFarland. We saw Corbin get the rushing touchdown opportunity for the Brahmas last week. So McFarland, super efficient on his 6 touches, averaging a ridiculous amount of yards per carry this season on his 9 total touches on the ground, but not seeing as many opportunities as Corbin. If it is still these 2 guys, I would advocate for Corbin as the better play here, but we need to see what's going on with John Lovett on this week's injury report. And finally, the DC defenders, Abram Smith and Deion Jackson, a lot closer in usage than I think people were expecting. Smith with just under 50% of team rushes, averaging 14.5 carries per game, and then Deion Jackson averaging 11 carries per game for about 36% of team rushes thus far on the season. Based on a cost-benefit analysis as far as salary is concerned, it might not be the worst idea to take a flyer on Jackson in the large field GPP this week, just because he's 5,100 versus the 8,500 for Smith. But Smith undoubtedly has the better role, seeing more carries, seeing more targets in the passing game. All right, the quarterback position. Manny Wilkins is seeing a tremendous amount of opportunities on the ground, 8+ rush attempts in the first 2 weeks of the season. And he's one of like 3 quarterbacks that has that kind of upside that we can play. He's the best of the group. It's Wilkins with the Battlehawks, it's Kellen Mond with the Brahmas, and it's Jordan Ta'amu with the Defenders. Now that Alex Magoo is on the shelf, Matt Corral is going to be more of a pocket passer for them. I am interested in playing Corral, but Wilkins undoubtedly the best play here with his ability to produce with his legs and has opportunity to score some of those touchdowns in the red zone as well. We get Wilkins at quarterback, we get Sailors at running back. I do think that is basically what the majority of the field is going to do in low-risk contests and probably in tournaments as well. There are plenty of cheaper pass catchers, plenty of defenses that we can roster this week to make it fit. So I do think, bottom line, that is the best place to start with your lineups for all contest types this week. Only differentiate really for tournaments. St. Louis has the highest implied team total on this slate at 22.5 points. But behind them, we do have first game of the slate. We have the Birmingham Stallions. And Alex McGough on injured reserve, going to miss at least the next 5 weeks of the season. Puts Matt Corral under center as the starter here at $9,000. Last week, basically played the whole game because McGough got hurt on the first snap of play. 29 pass attempts, 3 rush attempts on the ground. So it's not like Corral doesn't have rushing upside, but he's not going to lean on his legs as much as Alex McGough would have. So we're expecting to see a little bit more traditional drop back passing from the Stallions here, which may make their receivers more attractive options here. More on that in a minute. Kellen Mond has completely underperformed to start the season. We're averaging just 7.2 fantasy points per game here, but we're seeing right around 30 dropbacks to pass. We're seeing a little bit of rushing upside with 3 rush attempts in each of the first couple of games of the season here. We are expecting some regression in the scoring department. We have not yet seen a passing touchdown from this Brahmas offense. It's going to happen at some point. And with Mond being one of only a handful of quarterbacks that's playing every single snap at the position, we have to be interested in him regardless of spreads, totals, or anything like that, because he's able to give us a full game's worth of reps. And he's got a pretty clear group of receivers that we can target as well. Luis Perez with the Arlington Renegades. Also the other full-time quarterback, underdog here against Birmingham. Might be a good thing for his passing attempts. Not interested in him at his high cost this week. And then Jordan Ta'amu has completely underperformed, very mediocre, completing under 50% of his passes. But we have pretty high upside rolls at receiver here. Ty Scott leading the team in targets, over a 30% share of targets in the offense. We've got Cornell Powell with 14 targets over the first couple of games of the season, a tremendous amount of air yards, just 2 receptions for 23 yards and a 2-point conversion. And we have Chris Rowland, who has been extremely efficient in the passing game on limited reps for DC. So there are a lot of opportunities for DC here as the underdog against the Battlehawks to use this week as well. And if Tom is more efficient, fantasy points will come along with that. So quarterback position, just kind of interested in those guys here. Wide receivers and tight ends. Don't have an official list of underperforming wide receivers because we like 3 weeks of data before we get there. But the biggest one on the board is going to be Cornell Powell. See these 14 targets, a nice little 0 reception, 0 yards, 0 touchdowns on 5 targets in week 2 against Memphis. Had a nice long pass that was thrown his way right at the goal line last week that was broken up, believed to be intercepted at first, overturned. Due for regression, running virtually all of his routes out wide. So a lot of opportunities here for DC to succeed with Powell. Definitely a good high-risk play. Your safe plays at the position this week, safe. The plays that everybody's going to be looking at, it's going to be Ty Scott with DC. 10-plus points, 9-plus targets each of the first couple of weeks of the season. Underdog wide receiver here, so a good game script potentially for DC to throw the football early and often to Ty Scott. Been the best receiver through the first couple of weeks of the season in the fantasy area of things anyway. Jonathan Adams, 21 plus fantasy points in each of the first 2 weeks of the season. He'll be another option everyone will be deploying in their low risk lineups this week that you should focus on. And then we got a couple of affordable options that I like this week on some underdog teams. We have Jacob Harris with the San Antonio Brahmas. He's just $5,100 this week. 8 targets last week, same number of targets as Jontre Kirkland, who is carrying a much higher price tag. Jacob Harris being extremely efficient here, averaging 18.9 yards per reception. And if we get some of that regression in the passing game for passing touchdowns this week that we're expecting for the Brahmas, Harris is one of the best opportunities, one of the best players to bet on to experience that regression in a good way that we can benefit from here in fantasy football on DraftKings this week. $5,100, probably going to be popular in both low and high risk contests. And then we saw Isaiah Winstead get an incredible amount of targets last week against Houston, 9 targets, slot receiver here for them, still just $5,400. Salary didn't come up a tremendous amount after last week's efficient game. He will also be someone that the field can consider that feels a little bit safer. So these are, I think, the best low-risk plays at pass catcher. Some high-risk plays that I like this week in addition to DC's Cornell Powell. I am going back to the well for the third week in a row. Davion Davis for the Birmingham Stallions. He is tied with Deon Cain for the lead in targets on this offense through the first 2 weeks with 9. And Deon Cain is out this week. So Davion Davis may see a little bit more of an increased role here as the primary wide receiver for the Stallions this week. Something that also caught my eye reviewing week number 2 with Matt Corral under center. The Stallions, or Corral specifically, targeted Jace Sternberger 6 times. After Sternberger really didn't do much for us in week 1, 6 targets in week number 2 against the Michigan Panthers. Could also be a player that could benefit from increased opportunity with Deon Cain out. So those are the 2 Stallions I'm most interested in this week. Really underwhelming game last week for Justin Hall on his 6 targets. Just 1 reception for 11 yards on his targets from Anthony Brown and Nolan Henderson. I would expect some regression here that we can benefit from. But we got a little bit of breaking news this week that the Houston Roughnecks went out and acquired star Michigan Panther wide receiver Marcus Sims. So now it remains to be seen how Houston will divide up the opportunities here for the wide receivers. My gut tells me that Marcus Sims runs more of your downfield high upside routes and that Justin Hall operates more out of the slot. I don't, at this time, have much interest in either one this week until I see how this plays out. But that's obviously an interesting combination when we have 2 of the best receivers in the UFL for fantasy football between Marcus Sims and Justin Hall in the same offense now. Maybe Houston's hoping this can spark them to start winning some football games. So let's build a lineup here. I've got Manny Wilkins at quarterback. I've got Jacob Sailors at running back. I'm most interested in the Showboats as a defense against the Roughnecks this week. I do think that's probably going to be a popular play either side of that game. But with the Showboats favored and at a modest price, $4,100, I think that's where the field is going to go. We definitely want to try to get Scott and Adams into our low-risk lineups this week. But we notice we don't really have a ton of salary remaining to make that fit. So the most logical player, I think, to come down off of here is going to be Ty Scott, just because he is the second most expensive pass catcher on the board. And I can get to Jacob Harris at his high upside role. We can get to Isaiah Winstead at receiver out of the slot. Now we have 7,300 to finish off a low-risk lineup. Might want to actually put Winstead in the traditional wide receiver spot just because that's the first game coming off the board here. But we can pretty much go any direction we want with a final flex there. And so if you do this, salary is kind of irrelevant. We can get another high upside running back for tournaments and for low-risk contests. I went through all the running backs already, but Caboti with Memphis, McCrary with Michigan. I think 2 of the better options here for your final flex spot. And then at the receiver position, a lot of the guys that I already talked about in this video that fit under $7,300 are also in play here. Should be an interesting week here in week 3 of the UFL. If you like this video, we'd appreciate it if you could give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. We're going to be here talking UFL throughout the rest of the regular season and the 2-week postseason. Good luck in week 3 of the UFL, guys. I'll be back next week to talk to you about week 4.